Imagine walking into a crowded room in 1971 and seeing the legendary martial arts icon Bruce Lee sitting calmly at a table. Across from him sits a massive, powerful 260-pound female arm wrestling champion, a woman known for crushing opponents twice his size. People start whispering. Some laugh, thinking this tiny martial artist doesn't stand a chance. Others lean in closer, because something about Bruce Lee's quiet confidence feels different. The table between them suddenly becomes the center of attention. Cameras aren't rolling, but the tension feels like a championship fight. What happens next shocks everyone in the room, and the moment quickly turns into a story people repeat for decades. In the early 1970s, the reputation of Bruce Lee had already begun spreading far beyond martial arts schools and movie studios. People knew him as a lightning-fast fighter, a philosopher of movement, and a man obsessed with pushing the limits of human potential. But many people still misunderstood the type of strength he possessed. To the average observer, Bruce Lee didn't look intimidating. He was lean, compact, and weighed barely around 135 pounds. In a world where strength was often judged by sheer size and body weight, he seemed almost too small to be taken seriously in a contest of raw power. That's exactly why moments like this became legendary. One afternoon in 1971, during a casual gathering where athletes and martial arts enthusiasts were present, a powerful female arm wrestling champion entered the conversation. She was known for her incredible physical strength. At around 260 pounds, she had the kind of size and leverage that made most opponents surrender before even gripping her hand. People who had competed against her often described her arms as unmovable once the match started. When someone jokingly suggested that Bruce Lee should try arm wrestling her, the room immediately reacted with laughter and curiosity. To many observers, it sounded ridiculous. A man who weighed barely half her size going up against a heavyweight arm wrestling champion seemed like a guaranteed defeat. But Bruce Lee didn't laugh. Instead, he looked at the table, then calmly looked at the champion. His expression stayed relaxed, almost playful. Bruce Lee had always believed that strength was more than muscle mass. His philosophy focused on efficiency, explosive energy, and the ability to concentrate force into a single precise moment. For Bruce Lee, the human body wasn't just a collection of muscles. It was a system of mechanics, angles, timing, and controlled power. While many athletes trained to build bigger muscles, Bruce trained to deliver power through structure and speed. The woman across the table, however, relied on a completely different type of strength. Her training focused on endurance and brute force. Arm wrestling for her was about locking the arm, applying pressure, and gradually overpowering the opponent. When the idea of a match started spreading through the room, people began gathering around the table. Conversations turned into bets and predictions. Some spectators whispered that the match wouldn't last more than 2 seconds. Others joked that Bruce Lee might get his arm slammed down before he even had time to react. But Bruce Lee quietly rolled up his sleeve. The difference in size became even more obvious once both competitors placed their elbows on the table. Her forearm looked massive compared to his. Her grip looked thick and powerful. Bruce Lee's arm looked lean, almost delicate by comparison. But those who knew his training methods understood that his strength came from a completely different place. Bruce Lee had spent years conditioning his body in ways that few people understood. He practiced fingertip push-ups, explosive 1-inch punches, and resistance drills designed to strengthen the tendons and connective tissues in his arms and shoulders. His goal wasn't just to be strong. His goal was to generate maximum power in the shortest possible movement. As their hands clasped together, the room suddenly grew quiet. People leaned forward. Some spectators expected Bruce Lee to struggle immediately under the champion's heavy pressure. Others were simply curious how long he could hold his ground before the inevitable happened. But Bruce Lee's face remained calm. His eyes focused not on the crowd, not on the noise, but on the connection between their hands. He adjusted his elbow slightly, aligning his body at a precise angle. To most observers, it looked like a minor movement, but it was actually a calculated adjustment of leverage. The female champion, confident in her superior size and experience, tightened her grip. She had likely faced dozens of challengers before, and most of them failed quickly. To her, this probably seemed like another easy victory. But Bruce Lee wasn't thinking about victory in the traditional sense. He was studying the moment. He believed that the key to any physical contest was understanding timing and structure. If the body was aligned correctly and force was applied at exactly the right instant, even a smaller person could generate surprising power. Someone in the crowd finally shouted for them to start. Their arms tensed, muscles tightened. For a split second, nothing happened. The crowd expected a slow struggle, a grinding push of strength against strength. Instead, the energy at the table felt explosive, unpredictable, as if something unusual was about to happen. Bruce Lee slightly shifted his wrist, directing force not only through his arm but through his entire body alignment. It was the same principle he used in martial arts strikes, where power traveled from the legs through the torso and into the arm. The champion responded with pure pressure, pushing downward with the full weight of her strength, and that's when the match truly began. As the signal to start echoed around the room, both competitors tightened their grip. The crowd expected a long struggle, the kind where two people slowly push against each other until one arm finally gives out. Most arm wrestling matches unfold that way. Power builds gradually, pressure increases second by second, and eventually the stronger arm forces the other down. But this moment was different. Across the table sat Bruce Lee, a man whose entire philosophy revolved around explosive movement rather than prolonged force. While the 260-pound champion prepared to apply steady downward pressure, Bruce Lee prepared to release power in a completely different way. The female champion leaned slightly forward, positioning her shoulder behind her arm to maximize leverage. Her strategy was simple and proven. Once the match started, she would apply consistent pressure, locking the opponent's wrist and slowly forcing the arm down. For most challengers, that method worked perfectly. Her arm was thick and powerful, built through years of competition. The muscles in her forearm flexed as she tightened her grip, and her confidence showed in the calm expression on her face. But Bruce Lee's mind was already working several steps ahead. He had spent years studying biomechanics, understanding how small adjustments in angle could multiply the force generated by the body. Instead of relying only on the arm, he believed true power traveled through the entire structure of the body. To the crowd watching, Bruce Lee looked relaxed, almost casual. His arm didn't appear tense the way most competitors looked before a match. His shoulders remained loose and his breathing stayed steady. This calmness confused some of the spectators. They expected him to look nervous facing an opponent nearly twice his size. Instead, he looked like someone about to demonstrate a technique rather than fight for survival. The champion suddenly began the first push. Her arm drove forward with steady pressure, muscles tightening as she tried to gain immediate control of the position. The table creaked slightly as the force increased. For a brief second, their arms remained perfectly balanced in the center. That moment felt frozen in time. Then Bruce Lee moved. The movement was so fast that several people in the room later described it as a blur. Instead of slowly resisting the downward pressure, Bruce Lee rotated his wrist and shifted his body alignment in a single explosive motion. The power didn't come from just his arm. It came from his legs pressing into the ground, his torso rotating, his shoulder aligning perfectly behind the movement, and finally his forearm transferring that force directly into the grip. It was the same principle he used when demonstrating his famous one-inch punch, a technique where power is delivered through precise timing rather than distance. The sudden burst of energy caught the champion completely off guard. She had expected resistance, not an explosion. The pressure at the table increased dramatically within a fraction of a second. Instead of the slow contest everyone expected, the force applied between their arms surged instantly. Spectators leaned closer. Some gasped as they realized this wasn't unfolding like a normal arm wrestling match. The champion responded immediately, pushing back with all the strength she had developed through years of training. Her muscles tightened and her body leaned forward to counter the sudden shift in momentum. For a brief instant, the table absorbed the combined pressure of both competitors. Wood strained under the load. The crowd watched in disbelief as the force at the center of the table intensified. Bruce Lee's expression remained focused, his eyes locked on the angle of the movement. He wasn't trying to overpower her slowly. He was trying to release power at exactly the right moment. And when that moment arrived, the pressure between their arms surged again. The table suddenly cracked under the strain. A sharp snapping sound echoed through the room, shocking everyone watching. The surface that had supported the match just seconds earlier split under the combined explosive force. Hands separated instantly as both competitors reacted to the unexpected collapse. For a moment, the entire room fell silent. People looked at the broken table, then at Bruce Lee, trying to process what they had just witnessed. What began as a casual challenge had suddenly turned into a demonstration of something far more unusual than ordinary strength. Many spectators had expected Bruce Lee to lose quickly because of the massive difference in size. Instead, they had just seen a moment where technique, timing, and explosive power created a result nobody had predicted. The story of that instant, the grip, the burst of power, and the sudden break of the table, quickly became one of those moments people repeated again and again whenever they talked about Bruce Lee's incredible abilities. To understand why moments like this became legendary, it's important to understand how Bruce Lee trained and thought about strength. Unlike many athletes who focused primarily on building larger muscles, Bruce Lee approached physical power as a scientific process. He believed the human body functioned like a system of interconnected levers. Every movement, every strike, and every application of force depended on alignment, timing, and efficiency. If those elements were correct, a person could generate far more power than their body size suggested. Bruce Lee studied everything that could improve this system. He experimented with weight training, martial arts drills, speed exercises, and resistance training. But what made his approach unique was the way he combined all these elements into one philosophy of movement. One of his key principles was called economy of motion. Instead of wasting energy through unnecessary movement, Bruce Lee trained his body to deliver power through the shortest and most efficient path possible. This allowed him to move faster than most opponents and strike with explosive force. Another major difference in his training involved tendon strength. Most people train muscles to grow larger. Bruce Lee also focused heavily on strengthening the tendons and connective tissues that link muscles to bones. Strong tendons allow force to transfer through the body more efficiently, which increases explosive power. This is why many people who trained with Bruce Lee often described his strength as shocking. Even though his arms were not large, the force he could generate during sudden movements felt extremely powerful. His body had been conditioned to release energy quickly, rather than slowly. Speed played another important role. Bruce Lee famously said that speed creates power. When a movement accelerates rapidly, the impact multiplies. In martial arts strikes, this principle allowed him to hit with tremendous force despite his relatively small frame. The same concept could apply in any contest involving physical pressure. By combining speed, alignment, and body coordination, Bruce Lee could generate bursts of force that surprised larger opponents who relied mainly on raw strength. Another factor was his incredible body control. Bruce Lee trained his muscles to activate at the exact moment they were needed. Instead of tensing his entire body at once, he coordinated each movement so that energy flowed smoothly from the ground up through his body. This coordination allowed him to create what many people described as connected strength. Rather than using only the arm, his entire body worked together as a single unit. When that chain of movement activated, the resulting force could feel much stronger than expected. People who sparred or trained with Bruce Lee often said the same thing afterward. They expected him to feel light or easy to overpower because of his size. Instead, they felt sudden bursts of strength that seemed disproportionate to his body weight. Stories like the arm wrestling challenge spread because they illustrated this unusual type of strength in a simple way people could understand. A large champion with powerful arms facing a smaller martial artist made the contrast obvious. When the smaller man produced surprising force, it forced observers to rethink their assumptions about power. Bruce Lee himself often tried to teach this lesson. He believed strength should never be judged only by size. True power came from understanding the mechanics of movement and training the body to function as a unified system. This philosophy later became a core part of his martial arts approach, known as Jeet Kune Do. where efficiency and adaptability were more important than rigid techniques. By focusing on speed, timing, and structural alignment, Bruce Lee demonstrated that physical ability could go far beyond what people expected from appearance alone. Moments like the famous arm wrestling story continued to circulate for decades because they perfectly illustrated this idea that the real secret behind Bruce Lee's strength was not simply muscle, but the intelligent use of the entire human body as a precise and powerful instrument.